Let's break down what defenses you can pick up from the waiver wire moving into week 2 of 2024 fantasy football and plug in right away to your starting lineup to absolutely dominate your opposing league mate and make sure you come out of week 2 with a dub. Before we hop into today's video, let me remind you guys that Underdog is the place you want to be if you want to get into additional fantasy football action all season long. Underdog's week 2 pick'ems will be going out throughout this week, leading up to Thursday night's matchup between the Bills and the Dolphins. If you guys want to claim a free pick'em to use leading up to Thursday night's game, moving into Sunday's action, compare this pick'em with any pick throughout the entire week. That's going to be Josh Allen over half of a total yard. You can claim that with promo code the catch. That link is down below. And while you guys are claiming your free Josh Allen over half of a yard pick'em, you will also get a 50% deposit match up to $1,000 on Underdog. That's up to $1,000 in bonus cash you can use on Underdog with promo code the catch. Link is down below. Let's hop right into our week 2 must start defenses. All right, let's kick things off with the Seattle Seahawks, who are going to be traveling to New England to face the Patriots. The Seattle Seahawks made last week's must starts and streams for defensive teams, and I like them again in week 2 after a solid performance in week 1 where they had 11 fantasy points, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, and 2 interceptions, allowed just 231 total yards against Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos. So they got a bad quarterback, rookie quarterback in week 1. Then now in week 2, they get a bad quarterback, veteran quarterback in Jacoby Brissett. But I will say Jacoby Brissett in week 1, a quarterback that we tried to stream against with the Cincinnati Bengals being one of the top options in terms of streaming defenses last week, and it didn't necessarily play out, but also, the Cincinnati Bengals defense was just awful last week. But Jacoby Brissett at least found a way to not turn the football over, no interceptions, no fumbles, 32 yards on the ground, 121 yards through the air, but there's definitely still potential for turnovers in this game for the Seattle Seahawks. The secondary looked pretty intact against the Broncos overall. I know they kind of allowed for a little bit of almost a comeback towards the end of that game. Bo Nix rushed for a touchdown, all that stuff. But I think the Seattle Seahawks very ground at home. They became a popular streaming option towards the end of last week, so they may or may not be rostered in your respective league. They ended last week at 43% rostered, so still pretty low overall. I don't think you're going to want them in weeks 3 or 4 because they'll face the Miami Dolphins and then the Detroit Lions, but they do get the Giants in week 5 before they host the San Francisco 49ers at home. So they at least have a nice streaming option in week 5 if you're able to hold on to them. But the following 2 weeks, Miami as well as Detroit, not looking so good. But here in week 2, which is what we're focusing on, I think they have another good opportunity to have 10 plus fantasy points. I still think the Seattle Seahawks a very solid streaming option moving into week 2. All right, next up, let's talk about the Los Angeles Chargers. And I was kind of torn on week 1's matchup between the Chargers and the Raiders. I thought there was opportunities for both defenses to have, good streaming weeks, but the Chargers came through. They ended last week at just 5% rostered. So definitely a defense that's probably out there available on waivers for you. Week 2, they will travel to the Carolina Panthers, and I think they can have themselves another solid fantasy day. 16 fantasy points last week. And side note, some of these, fantasy points by defenses might vary by whatever league you're in because there's different defensive scoring settings and all that stuff. But 14 to 16 fantasy points depending on your scoring format. And once again, I think here in week 2, they are in a great position. We talked about the Saints defense being one of the top plays in last week's video, and that was because we did not expect the Panthers to have a good day on the road. And they did not. They gave up 15 fantasy points to the Saints, a forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and 2 interceptions for the Saints defense. Both those interceptions, obviously, by Bryce Young. And I think this is another week where Bryce Young is going to potentially struggle once again. I expect the Panthers offense at some point this season to improve under Dave Canales. But I think week 2 is going to be tough again, even if they are at home. I think there's definitely Definitely interception upside for the Chargers defense this week. I think they can definitely force fumbles in this game. Overall, that Panthers offense just did not look good in week one. Even at home, I'm not worried about it. The Chargers, like I said, not highly rostered going into week two. I think they are another smash streaming option as we approach the week. I think they can easily hit double-digit fantasy points once again in week two. All right, next up, we are talking about a pure streaming option because we are trying to exploit the Green Bay Packers and their current quarterback situation by potentially starting the Indianapolis Colts, who ended last week just rostered in 2% of fantasy leagues for, good reason. They're facing the Houston Texans, an offense that obviously put up a lot of points in week one. Everyone expected that. So just 5 fantasy points in week one for the Indianapolis Colts. And we want to monitor this one as the week progresses because I still think this Green Bay Packers offense, a very well-coached offense, a well-coached team, a good system under Matt LaFleur, tons of playmakers. We still got Jacobs, Jaden Reed went off. We still got Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs. All of that is still there. So I want to kind of play this one kind of close to the books as the week goes on. But if Malik Willis is the starting quarterbacks for the Green Bay Packers in week two, if they don't go out and sign Ryan Tannehill or something, as of right now, they have named Malik Willis the starter. So I think there's plenty of interception upside for the Colts defense in week two. Even if we're not expecting a super high ceiling, we've got to take a chance here in terms of a streaming defense, trying to just exploit the fact that Malik Willis is going to be the starting quarterback for the Packers in week two. Who knows? Maybe he surprises us. I'm rooting for him. I want this Packers team to succeed because that helps everyone in fantasy who drafted guys like Josh Jacobs and Jaden Reed and Christian Watson, whoever it may be. But I think for now, we have to admit that there is definitely the opportunity to stream defenses against the Green Bay Packers until Jordan Love returns. So if you need kind of a deeper streaming option, I do think the Colts are an okay option moving into week two. All right, going back to the matchup that started the video, let's talk about the Patriots versus the Seahawks. So I do like the Seahawks in this matchup, but I also like the New England Patriots, who ended week one against the Bengals with 13 fantasy points. They ended up with 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, 3 total sacks, just 224 yards allowed, and just 10 points allowed against Joe Burrow and company. And, I don't necessarily know if there's a crazy high ceiling here because, the Seattle Seahawks still played pretty well at the end of the day. The run game was definitely there, and Kenneth Walker. We saw enough out of the rest of this offense that I think maybe I can understand wanting to stay away from the Patriots defense in this one, but we still saw Geno Smith get sacked twice in week one. We still saw him at least throw 1 interception, although he did throw for 1 and run for 1 as well. So at the end of the day, I can understand if you're a little bit shaky here, but still, the New England Patriots defense, a lot of people were down on them moving into week one, myself included. I just wanted to kind of see what would potentially happen. I still had faith that the Bengals offense wouldn't be a complete disaster at home, and they basically were. But nonetheless, right, New England Patriots, when we look at week one, definitely have an opportunity to come through once again. This is a home game, so that's even better. I just think that there's opportunity here for at least, an interception in this game, then a safe enough floor where they keep this a little bit of a lower scoring game overall and still walk out of this with about 10 fantasy points. I think double digits is a realistic opportunity for the Patriots defense in week two. So a little bit of a lower ceiling streaming option here, but I definitely think the Patriots, who ended up being, ending week one, 64% rostered as the week kind of went on, and we is Jamar Chase even going to play? T. Higgins is out. More and more fantasy managers started to gravitate towards the Patriots and showed some faith in them, and that ended up working out with those 13 fantasy points. So if they're out there, if they're available, they are a little bit higher rostered. Do you think they are worth a stream as we move into week two? All right, let's end the video with 2 must-start defenses. The Pittsburgh Steelers ended week one at 64% rostered. Some people a little bit wary of starting them in week one with a new and improved, or in theory, a new and improved Falcons offense, which for the most part was still okay, but very disappointing. And this Steelers defense really showed up. I mean, I don't know if the Falcons offense is that bad or if the Steelers defense is that good. I expected the secondary to be a little bit weaker in this game and that front seven to still be, showing up for the Steelers, but all around the Steelers defense looked really good. Just 10 points allowed, 2 sacks in this game, but they were getting constant pressure on Kirk Cousins, a forced fumble, 2 interceptions, 226 total yards allowed, 12 fantasy points at the end of the day, double digits. They travel once again in week 2. They are at Denver to face the Broncos. We talked about, Seattle earlier in this video having success against Bo Nix and company in week 1. And listen, we're going to see flashes out of a quarterback in this rookie season, a quarterback like Bo Nix, but it's going to take time to really get going if Bo Nix is truly going to be a starter in this league. And there's going to be growing pains. And from a fantasy perspective with defensive starts, we always want to try and exploit that. So the Steelers, even on the road again in week 2, I think are a great start. Once again, this is a little bit of a higher roster team at 64%, but they are out there because one of your league mates did not want to start them against the Falcons in week 1, then they are absolutely a defense that needs to be picked up and started in week 2 against the Denver Broncos. They are an absolute smash play. Do not be afraid to start the Steelers in week 2 whatsoever. All right, one more must-start defense if they are available, which they probably aren't, but this is a team that if you own the Baltimore Ravens in week 1, you probably didn't start them because they were facing the Kansas City Chiefs. They ended week 1 at 93% rostered, but just want to assure you guys, while the Ravens do have a little bit of a tough stretch coming up, in week 3 they're against Dallas, week 4 they're against Buffalo, and in theory, a tough game at Cincinnati in week 5, but right now I don't know if that's the case. But here in week 2, which is what we're focused on, they have a great matchup against Noodle Arm, Gardner Minshew. I know the Raiders, had some moments in this game, but ultimately they were pretty dang bad against the Chargers. And this is not the Chiefs who we're playing here in week 2. It's the Raiders. It's a much better matchup. The Ravens still had 2 sacks and an interception against the Kansas City Chiefs, although they allowed 353 total yards and 27 points. That's not going to be the case in week 2. If you own the Ravens, you might want to hold on to a streaming defense because, like I said, Dallas, Buffalo the next 2 weeks, but this is why you own the Baltimore Ravens because they are going to have a smash defensive day in week 2 at home, their first home game of the season against the Raiders. They are an absolute must-start defense no matter what as we approach week 2. That'll do it for today's video. If you guys have any fantasy football questions whatsoever moving into week 2, waiver wire, start sets, trades, roster reviews, what defenses should you add? What kickers should you add? Anything that you guys need at all, any format, drop those comments down below. I will get back to every single comment on this video. If you guys did enjoy the content or find it helpful, all I ask is on the way out that you guys hit that subscribe button. And with that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on the catch.